What if the most powerful pharmacy in the world has been sitting in your kitchen, your garden, and your windowsill your entire life, and nobody told you? We spend billions every year on supplements, on prescriptions, on cold-pressed $14 bottles of things we can't pronounce. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that the women who raised our grandmothers didn't have a Walgreens on the corner. They had a garden. They had knowledge passed down through generations. And they healed things we now run to a doctor for. This isn't about rejecting modern medicine. This is about remembering something older. Something that worked long before clinical trials existed to confirm it. And something that modern research is now quietly verifying one study at a time. Today, we're looking at 7 herbs your grandmother almost certainly knew. Herbs that appear in ancient texts, in biblical manuscripts, in the medical records of civilizations that lasted thousands of years. And we're going to talk about what they actually do inside your body. The mechanisms, the compounds, the science that's slowly catching up to what healers have known since before Rome was built. Stay with me, because number 3 on this list was so medicinally valuable that medieval apothecaries kept it under lock and key. Quite literally a locked cabinet, the way we lock up controlled substances today. And number 1 is something you walked past in a garden this week without giving it a second thought. It contains compounds that kill antibiotic-resistant bacteria. You'll never look at it the same way again. If this kind of content is what you've been looking for, the real history, the real science, without the marketing, hit subscribe right now. This channel is for people who want to know what actually works, not what's trending. Item 7, elderberry. There is a moment in European history worth pausing on. It is the 14th century. Roughly 1/3 of the continent's population is dying. The Black Plague is moving through cities faster than anyone can explain, and the medical establishment, such as it was, is helpless. In the villages and rural communities where formal medicine never reached, healers were doing something the physicians weren't. They were reaching for elderberry, Sambucus nigra, a shrub so common in the European countryside that it grew along roadsides and hedgerows like a weed. And yet it occupied a central place in the folk medicine of nearly every European culture simultaneously. Celts, Slavs, Norse, Mediterranean peoples, without any of them having communicated with the others. That kind of independent convergence is worth noticing. When separate civilizations with no contact arrive at the same plant for the same purpose, it's not coincidence. It's observation. It's generations of people watching what worked and writing it down in the only way they knew how, by doing it again. Most people know elderberry today as a syrup you buy at a health food store when flu season starts. That's not wrong, but it's a fraction of what this plant represents. Here's what the research actually shows. Elderberries contain compounds called anthocyanins, the same pigments that give them their deep purple-black color. These anthocyanins bind directly to viral particles, specifically to proteins on the surface of influenza viruses, and physically block the virus from entering human cells. In a meta-analysis published in 2016 that reviewed multiple randomized trials, elderberry supplementation was shown to substantially reduce both the duration and severity of cold and flu symptoms. Not marginally, substantially. There's also a flavonoid compound in elderberry, quercetin, that appears in more and more research on immune modulation and inflammatory response. It inhibits the enzyme neuraminidase, which is incidentally the same mechanism exploited by Tamiflu. The pharmaceutical industry cannot patent elderberry. That's not a conspiracy. It's just a fact of patent law. You can't own a plant. And so there's no financial incentive to run the kind of large-scale clinical trial that would put this on the front page of every medical journal. The evidence that exists is good. It's just not loud. In the old tradition, elderberry was made as a syrup with raw honey and cloves. Dark berries, simmered slowly, strained and cooled, combined with honey while still warm, so the enzymes in the honey remained active. A tablespoon a day through winter. Not a treatment, a habit. The kind of habit that kept families healthier in an age when there was nothing else. The elder tree was considered protective in Germanic and Norse traditions. You didn't cut one down without asking permission. There was a spirit said to live in it. That sounds like superstition, until you understand that people were encoding reverence for something they knew to be valuable in the only language their culture gave them for that kind of importance. Item 6. Lemon balm. Melissa officinalis. In Greek, Melissa means bee. The plant was named for the insect because beekeepers rubbed it on their hives to encourage bees to stay and to attract new swarms. That's how valued it was, not as medicine, but as a resource so important to ancient agriculture that it was used to manage the creatures that fed the civilization. The Romans carried it everywhere their armies went. Medieval monastery gardens always had it. It was among the herbs Charlemagne decreed must be grown in every imperial garden in the 9th century. A decree called the Capitulaire de Villiers, which amounted to the first royal plant medicine policy in Western European history. Most people today, if they know lemon balm at all, think of it as a mild calming tea, something you drink before bed. Nice, but not serious. Here's what's actually happening when you drink it. Lemon balm contains compounds called rosmarinic acid and several specific terpenes, primarily citral and linalool, that act on the GABA receptor system in the brain. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. When it's dysregulated, you get anxiety, insomnia, restlessness, the racing mind that won't stop at 2 in the morning. The terpenes in lemon balm modulate GABA in a way that's pharmacologically similar in direction, though much more gentle, to the mechanism of benzodiazepines. Double-blind studies have shown measurable reduction in anxiety scores after acute lemon balm administration. Other research has focused on its effect on the herpes simplex virus. Specifically, rosmarinic acid and flavonoids in the plant have demonstrated direct antiviral activity against HSV. One in vitro, which is why it appears in European herbal pharmacopoeias as a topical treatment for cold sores. But here's what gets buried. A study published in Nutrients in 2014 tested lemon balm extract on participants with mild to moderate anxiety and sleep disorders. After 15 days, 95% of participants reported reduced insomnia. 85% reported reduced anxiety. These were not marginal improvements. The pharmaceutical industry developed an entire category of sleep and anxiety medication, benzodiazepines, Z-drugs, newer anxiolytics, that generate hundreds of billions in annual revenue. Lemon balm grows in any garden in a temperate climate and costs almost nothing. These two facts are not unrelated. Your great-grandmother probably had it by the kitchen door, brewed as a tea, fresh or dried, in the evening, maybe with a little honey, maybe with chamomile. She wasn't being quaint. She was working with a compound that her family had tested across hundreds of winters and found effective. Item 5. Marshmallow root. Not the candy. What the candy was named after, before manufacturers replaced the plant with refined sugar and gelatin and forgot to include the actual medicine. Althea officinalis. The word althea comes from the Greek although, meaning to heal. The ancient Greeks and Romans used it as a primary remedy for inflammation of the digestive tract, the urinary tract, the respiratory system. Hippocrates, the man whose name we still take an oath in, referenced it specifically for wound healing and inflammatory conditions. It appears in texts from the ancient Near East. It was part of Arab medical tradition, European monastic medicine, and Native American healing practices across multiple distinct tribes. That level of universal independent adoption means something. The active constituent is called mucilage, specifically polysaccharide chains that, when they contact water, form a gel. This isn't a metaphor. You can test it yourself. Stir a teaspoon of marshmallow root powder into a glass of cold water and wait 10 minutes. The water thickens noticeably. That same gel, when it moves through the digestive tract, coats and soothes every mucous membrane it touches. The esophagus, the stomach lining, the intestinal wall, the urinary tract as it passes through. For anyone with acid reflux, leaky gut, irritable bowel, chronic UTIs, or an inflamed respiratory tract, this is not incidental. This is direct mechanical protection combined with genuine anti-inflammatory activity. The mucilage also appears to act as a prebiotic. It feeds specific beneficial bacteria in the gut microbiome particularly the strains associated with intestinal barrier integrity. What happened to marshmallow root? The same thing that happened to many botanical medicines in the early 20th century. Pharmaceutical companies developed synthetic versions of anti-inflammatory mechanisms. First corticosteroids, then proton pump inhibitors, then the entire NSAID category. These could be patented, these could be marketed, and they were at enormous scale. Marshmallow root costs a few dollars a pound. It grows across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It cannot be patented. It got reclassified from medicine to food supplement to herbal curiosity in roughly 3 generations. Cold infusion is the traditional preparation, and it's also the most medicinally active. You don't boil marshmallow root. High heat degrades the mucilaginous compounds you're trying to preserve. You put it in cold water, you let it sit overnight, you drink it in the morning. That's what village healers knew through trial and error, and it's exactly what the phytochemical research now confirms. Item 4. Calendula. Calendula officinalis. Bodmarigo. In ancient Rome, it was called Flos Calendi, the flower of the first day of the month, because it bloomed so reliably and continuously that Roman healers used it as a calendar. When calendula flowers, the season has arrived. When it stops, something has shifted. This is a plant that was never obscure. It appears in Indian Ayurvedic medicine, in ancient Egyptian cosmetic preparations, in medieval European wound healing practices, in the domestic medicine of early American settlers. A tincture of calendula was used on Civil War battlefields. Union medics applied it to wounds specifically to prevent infection and accelerate healing when they had nothing more sophisticated available. Most people today know calendula from moisturizer labels. Baby creams contains calendula as a marketing note on the side of a bottle. That's what it's been reduced to, a branding ingredient. Here's what it's actually doing. Calendula contains a set of compounds called triterpene saponins, specifically oleanolic acid glycosides, along with flavonoids including quercetin and isoramidin, and high concentrations of carotenoids. In combination, these produce 3 distinct biological activities that have been confirmed in clinical research. Anti-inflammatory action through inhibition of pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically IL-1 and TNF-alpha, the same inflammatory pathways targeted by many modern anti-inflammatory drugs. Antimicrobial activity against both gram-positive bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus, and certain fungal species. And wound healing acceleration through promotion of fibroblast migration and collagen synthesis. That last one is not trivial. A randomized controlled trial comparing calendula ointment to petroleum jelly in post-surgical wound care found calendula produced statistically significant improvements in both speed of closure and cosmetic outcome. The question no one asks when they pick up a baby lotion with calendula on the label: why is a pharmaceutical-grade wound healer in a cosmetics product rather than in a wound treatment product? The answer is that cosmetics don't require clinical evidence, and a plant that anyone can grow and extract at home can't support a prescription. Plant it in your garden. It grows almost anywhere, reseeds itself, and blooms continuously from late spring through hard frost. The flowers dried and infused in olive oil over several weeks produce a topical preparation that your grandmother would have recognized immediately. That preparation, tested in modern laboratories, contains measurable concentrations of the compounds described above. The preparation that costs $3 to make at home. Item 3. Valerian. This is the one kept under lock and key. In the European apothecary tradition, the precursor to the modern pharmacy, certain substances were stored separately from general stock in a locked cabinet called a medicine chest or spice cabinet. Access was controlled. Valerian root was among them. Not because it was dangerous in the way that, say, belladonna or arsenic require containment, but because it was so reliably effective for sedation, pain relief, and anxiety management that it had significant value and a real market. People paid for this, which means there was something worth paying for. Valeriana officinalis has been a sedative medicine for at least 2,000 years. The Roman physician Galen prescribed it for insomnia. The Persian physician Avicenna included it in his canon of medicine in the 11th century, possibly the most comprehensive and influential medical text of the medieval world, as a treatment for nervous conditions and heart palpitations. During World War II, it was distributed to British civilians during the Blitz as a nerve medicine to manage acute anxiety from aerial bombardment. The British government issued it, not as an experimental measure, because it was known to work. Here's the mechanism, and this is where it gets interesting. Valerian contains compounds called valerianic acid and isovaleric acid, along with a class of antioxidants called valipotriates. Valerianic acid has been demonstrated in multiple studies to modulate GABA-A receptors, again, the primary inhibitory system in the brain. It also inhibits the enzyme GABA transaminase, which breaks down GABA. Less breakdown means more GABA activity. More GABA activity means less anxiety, less neural overexcitation, and easier transition into sleep. Here's the part most people miss. Several independent randomized controlled trials have tested valerian against standard pharmacological sleep aids. One published in Pharmacology, Biochemistry, and Behavior tested valerian against oxazepam, a benzodiazepine, for sleep quality improvement. Over 28 days, valerian produced equivalent improvements in sleep quality with significantly fewer side effects and no measurable physiological dependence. The prescription sleep medication market generates approximately $4 billion annually in the United States alone. Valerian root, dried and encapsulated, costs less than $15 for a month's supply. These are not unrelated facts. The traditional preparation was root, dried, aged at least 1 year before use, as fresh valerian root has a different chemical profile than cured root, made as a tea or tincture. The smell is intense. It has been compared, charitably, to old socks. That smell is the isovaleric acid, which is incidentally the same compound that gives Parmesan cheese some of its sharpness. The smell does not indicate spoilage. It indicates potency. Your great-grandmother didn't enjoy the smell either. She used it anyway because she understood that medicine doesn't have to be pleasant. It has to work. Item 2. Thyme. Soldiers of ancient Greece and Rome believed that thyme gave courage. Warriors rubbed it on their skin before battle. The Scots burned it at funerals to give safe passage to the dead. Medieval knights wore sprigs of it embroidered on their tunics, given by women as tokens of bravery. Thymus vulgaris, from the Greek word thymos, which meant both time and spirit. What these cultures were encoding in the language of symbolism was something they had also observed practically. People who consumed thyme regularly seemed healthier, more resistant to disease, more capable of physical endurance. They didn't have the vocabulary for respiratory antimicrobial compounds, so they called it courage and burned it at the threshold between life and death, which is as accurate a description as any. Most people today use thyme as a cooking herb, a seasoning for roasted chicken, a sprig in a stew. They have no idea they're deploying a clinically studied antimicrobial agent every time they do it. Here's the compound that changes everything. Thymol. It's the primary active constituent of thyme oil, making up between 20 and 54% of the essential oil by volume, depending on the variety and growing conditions. Thymol is a phenolic compound with some of the most well-documented antimicrobial properties of any natural substance. It disrupts bacterial cell membranes. Specifically, it penetrates the lipid bilayer, causes leakage of cellular contents, and kills the bacterium from the inside out. This mechanism is effective against a remarkably broad spectrum of pathogens, including Staphylococcus aureus, Escherichia coli, Salmonella, Helicobacter pylori, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and, critically, several strains of MRSA, the antibiotic-resistant staph infection that kills tens of thousands of people in U.S. hospitals every year. That's worth sitting with. A plant that grows in a pot on a kitchen windowsill contains a compound that is active against antibiotic-resistant bacteria that our most powerful pharmaceutical arsenal struggles to touch. Thymol is not a new discovery. It has been in the German pharmacopoeia as an official respiratory medicine since 1990. The German Commission E, which functions as the German equivalent of the FDA for herbal medicines, has approved standardized time preparation for the treatment of bronchitis and upper respiratory catarrh based on the clinical evidence available at that point. For respiratory illness specifically, thyme works through a second mechanism beyond its antimicrobial activity. Thymol and the related compound carvacrol act as expectorants. They relax the smooth muscle of the bronchi, loosening mucus and making it easier to clear. A clinical trial published in Arzneimittelforschung, Germany's drug research journal, compared a thyme IV syrup preparation against the standard pharmaceutical expectorant in acute bronchitis. Thyme outperformed the pharmaceutical compound in symptom resolution time. Your grandmother put thyme in chicken soup for a reason. Not tradition. Observation. She had watched, or been taught by someone who had watched, that sick people who ate thyme in their food recovered differently from sick people who didn't. The science just needed a few more centuries to catch up. Fresh or dried. Steeped as a strong tea with honey for respiratory illness. Honey not as sweetener, but as a potentiator. The antimicrobial activity of both compounds appears additive in combination. This is not folk sentiment. This is what the research shows. Item 1. Yarrow. Achillea millefolium. Named for Achilles. The legend, recorded by Homer and elaborated for centuries after, holds that Achilles used yarrow to staunch the bleeding wounds of his soldiers on the battlefield of Troy. The Trojan War is dated, depending on the scholarly estimate, to somewhere around the 12th or 13th century BCE. Yarrow pollen has been found in Neanderthal burial sites in Shanidar Cave in what is now Iraq, dated to roughly 60,000 years ago. Whether it was placed there intentionally as medicine or as tribute or for some other purpose, we will never know. But it was there. 60,000 years. Of all the plants in the world, that one. If you've walked through a meadow or along a country road at any point in your life, you have almost certainly walked past yarrow without knowing its name. It's a common wildflower, white or pale pink clusters of tiny blossoms on feathery, deeply divided leaves. It grows in every temperate region on Earth. It grows in lawns. It grows in gravel. It grows in the cracks of things. And for 60,000 years, through the Neanderthals, through the Bronze Age Greeks, through Rome, through the Middle Ages, through the folk medicine of Native American peoples on a completely separate continent, through the Maori of New Zealand, through the traditional medicine of China and India, and across the full sweep of human civilization. This plant has been reached for, again and again, when there was bleeding, when there was fever, when there was wound infection, when there was digestive upset, when there was menstrual disorder. That is not coincidence. That is evidence of a different kind than a randomized control trial, but evidence nonetheless. Here is what this plant actually contains and why every one of those independent traditions was correct. Yarrow's chemistry is strikingly complex. It contains achillean, a compound that significantly accelerates blood coagulation, confirmed in multiple laboratory studies to reduce clotting time. It contains apigenin and luteolin, two flavonoids with well-documented anti-inflammatory and antispasmodic activity. It contains azulene, a compound that forms when yarrow is steam distilled and gives yarrow essential oil its distinctive blue color, which is a potent anti-inflammatory agent used in some dermatological preparations today. It contains lactone compounds with demonstrated antimicrobial properties against a range of pathogens. And it contains bitter iridoids that stimulate bile production and digestive secretion, which is why traditional healers across cultures prescribed it for digestive complaints. The hemostatic properties, the ability to stop bleeding, have been studied in clinical contexts. Yarrow extract applied to wounds measurably reduces time to hemostasis. This is the property that put it in the hands of every military surgeon, battlefield medic, and village healer for most of human history. Before sutures, before wound clotting agents, before anything pharmaceutical existed to address that problem, yarrow addressed it. But here's the piece of this that stops most people. Yarrow has documented activity against something that has become one of the defining crises of modern medicine: bacterial biofilm. Biofilms are colonies of bacteria that form a protective matrix, essentially a shield, that renders them extraordinarily resistant to antibiotics. Chronic wound infections, urinary tract infections, and implant-associated infections all frequently involve biofilm-forming bacteria that cannot be cleared with standard antibiotic treatment. Research published in the last decade has shown that yarrow extracts can disrupt and degrade these biofilm structures. We are developing entire pharmaceutical research programs dedicated to biofilm disruption because antibiotic resistance has made conventional treatment inadequate. The answer may have been growing in the field the whole time. How is it used? Fresh leaves applied directly to wounds to slow bleeding. This is consistent across every tradition, on every continent, in every era. As a strong tea for fever, for digestive upset, for menstrual cramping. As a tincture in alcohol for longer-term storage. In European folk medicine, a poultice of the chewed or crushed leaves applied to a fresh wound would stop bleeding within minutes. And the antimicrobial compounds in the plant were protecting that wound simultaneously without the healer understanding the mechanism. They just knew it worked. The greatest irony is this. Yarrow is so common, so widespread, so completely uninteresting to the pharmaceutical industry precisely because it is everywhere and costs nothing. No company will fund a clinical trial for a wildflower that grows in every lawn in North America. And so, the medicine stays invisible, the way medicine has always stayed invisible when there's no profit to be made from making it visible. It grows at the edge of the path you walk every morning. It has been there longer than your city, longer than your country, longer than recorded human history. It was always waiting to be remembered. The people who knew these plants were not primitive. They were not credulous. They were empiricists of the most rigorous kind. People who had no safety net, who applied these compounds to their own bodies and the bodies of people they loved, and who kept precise records in the only format available to them. Consistent practice, transmitted through families and communities across generations, tested against reality with the stakes as high as they ever get. Modern science did not discover what these plants do. In almost every case, modern science confirmed it. That distinction matters more than it might seem, because it means the knowledge existed first. It means the testing was real. It means the decision to set it aside had nothing to do with efficacy and everything to do with economics. One note worth making before you go find these herbs. Quality matters enormously. There's a significant difference between fresh yarrow growing in a clean field and a mislabeled capsule on a discount supplement shelf. There's a difference between time harvested at peak thymol content and dry time that's been sitting in a warehouse for 2 years. When you source these plants, source them carefully from reputable herbalists from your own garden, from organic suppliers who can tell you something about origin and handling. Here is what I want you to do before this week is out. Choose one herb from this list. Just one. The one that spoke to something you needed. Start there. Make the tea. Plant the seeds. Research the preparation. Do the thing your grandmother would have done. And tell me in the comments, which one surprised you most? Or is there an herb from your own family tradition that didn't make this list, something that was passed down to you, that you still use today? I read every comment, and those stories are often what shapes the next video. Next week, we're looking at something most people have never heard of despite the fact that it was the most widely traded medicinal substance in the ancient world, valued above gold in certain markets. And there's now serious clinical research suggesting it may be one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory compounds ever studied. That one is not to be missed.